For my entire life, my parents treated my brother's reckless mistakes as investments. But when the time came, they treated my life's work as nothing more than a slush fund to bail him out. If you want to understand how a family can completely implode over the course of a single Tuesday afternoon, you first have to understand the dynamic between my brother, Declan, and me. I'm Chloe, the younger sister by 3 years. But if you looked at our family history, you would have assumed I was the parent and Declan was the eternal, reckless teenager. My parents, Eric and Barbara, were traditional to a fault. In their eyes, the sun rose and set on Declan. When Declan wrecked his first car at 17 because he was texting, my parents blamed the car manufacturer for faulty brakes and bought him a newer, faster model. When I worked 3 jobs in college to graduate debt-free, they called it character building. When Declan dropped out of business school after 3 semesters to find himself in Europe, they funded his year-long backpacking trip, calling it an investment in his worldly education. I learned early on that if I wanted anything in life, I had to get it myself, and for the most part, I was fine with that. It made me sharp, it made me resilient, and it led me to Sam. Sam and I met in our mid-20s. He was an architect, I was a project manager for a software firm, and we shared the exact same vision for our future: stability, independence, and a home we could truly call our own. We saved obsessively. While our friends were taking vacations to Tulum and leasing luxury SUVs, we were driving 10-year-old sedans and cooking black bean chili at home. By the time I was 29, we had amassed an $80,000 cash nest egg. It was our down payment, our ticket to the American dream. We spent 6 months hunting for the perfect place. Finally, we found it. A 1920s craftsman in a historic, tree-lined neighborhood called Willow Creek. It was a fixer-upper, but the bones were magnificent. It had original oak floors hidden under hideous 1970s shag carpet, pocket doors, and a wraparound porch that practically begged for a pair of rocking chairs. The asking price was a steal because it needed significant cosmetic work, but there was a catch. The sellers were going through a bitter divorce and demanded a cash offer with a 10-day close, or they were selling to a corporate flipper. We had a massive down payment, but getting a traditional mortgage underwritten in 10 days, especially because Sam had just launched his own independent architecture firm a month prior, was going to be nearly impossible. Enter Eric and Barbara. My parents had recently downsized and were sitting on a significant amount of liquid cash. During a Sunday dinner, I mentioned the heartbreak of probably losing the Willow Creek house. To my utter shock, my father, Eric, put down his fork and made an offer. "We'll buy it in cash," he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "We'll close in 10 days. You give us your $80,000 as the down payment, and you just pay us the monthly mortgage equivalent. Once Sam's business shows 2 years of tax returns, you can finance it yourselves, pay us back the principal, and we'll transfer the deed." I hesitated. I had never borrowed a dime from them, but my mother leaned over, placing her manicured hand over mine. "Chloe, it's family. We want to see you settled. It's an investment in your future." It was the first time I felt like they were genuinely looking out for me. Sam was skeptical. He knew how my parents operated, but the allure of the house was too strong. We agreed. I wired my parents my entire life savings of $80,000. They bought the house in cash. The deed was in their name, but the house was ours. Or so I thought. For the next 18 months, Sam and I poured our blood, sweat, and every spare paycheck into that craftsman. We spent our weekends covered in drywall dust. We ripped up the shag carpet and spent 3 weeks hand sanding and restaining the original oak floors. Sam redesigned the kitchen, and we installed custom butcher block counters and a subway tile backsplash ourselves. We painted, we landscaped, we replaced the ancient water heater. We easily sank another $40,000 of our own money into the property, increasing its market value by at least $150,000. It was our sanctuary. I remember sitting on the wraparound porch with Sam one evening in late September, drinking cheap wine and looking at the string lights we had hung over our new patio. "We did it," I whispered, resting my head on his shoulder. "We did," he smiled. We were 6 months away from Sam hitting the 2-year mark with his business, 6 months away from getting our own mortgage and officially putting the deed in our names. But Declan was about to detonate a bomb in our lives. While Sam and I were building our future, Declan was actively destroying his. He had married a woman named Jessica, who shared his taste for champagne on a tap water budget. To maintain the illusion of success, Declan had bypassed traditional banks and gotten involved with some very shady, high-interest private lenders to fund a luxury auto-detailing franchise that was doomed from the start. I didn't know any of this, of course. My parents kept Declan's failures heavily guarded. But the reality was, Declan was in the hole for over $300,000. His creditors were not the type of people who sent polite letters in the mail. They were the type of people who showed up at your doorstep. He was facing bankruptcy, fraud charges, and potentially losing his own home. My parents were in a blind panic. They had tied up most of their cash in my house and their own retirement investments. They needed liquid money, and they needed it immediately to bail their golden boy out of the disaster he had created. I found out on a Tuesday. I was at work, deep in a spreadsheet, when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor from across the street. "Chloe, honey," she said, her voice crackling over the line. "Did you and Sam find a new place already? I'm so heartbroken you're leaving." My blood ran cold. "Leaving? Mrs. Gable, what are you talking about? There's a man in a suit putting a 'for sale' sign in your front yard right now. I thought you would have told me." I didn't even grab my purse. I sprinted to my car and broke every speed limit getting back to Willow Creek. When I pulled up, a glossy white wooden post was planted firmly in the hydrangeas I had planted that spring. A sign swinging from it read, "Mitchell Real Estate, coming soon." I parked my car diagonally across the driveway, my tires screeching, and jumped out. A man in a sharp blue suit was taking photos of my porch with an iPad. "Hey!" I screamed, marching across the lawn. "What the hell are you doing? Get that sign off my property." The man lowered his iPad, looking startled but professional. "Ma'am, are you Chloe? Eric and Barbara told me you might be emotional about the sale. I'm Mitchell, the listing agent." "They told you? What?" The world tilted on its axis. "This is my house. You need to leave. Now." "I'm sorry, Chloe," Mitchell said, his tone shifting to one of practiced pity. "I checked the public records. Eric and Barbara are the sole legal owners on the deed. They signed the listing agreement with me this morning. I'm just doing my job." I didn't argue with him. I got back in my car, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the key in the ignition, and drove straight to my parents' house. I didn't bother knocking. I burst through the front door. My mother was sitting at the kitchen island, a cup of tea halfway to her mouth. My father was pacing in the living room, rubbing his temples. They both froze when they saw me. "Are you out of your minds?" I yelled, the sound echoing off their vaulted ceilings. "There is a realtor at my house! My house!" My father stopped pacing and crossed his arms, adopting the authoritative posture he used when he was about to lay down the law. "Chloe, lower your voice. Sit down." "I am not sitting down!" I screamed, tears of absolute rage stinging my eyes. "What is going on, Dad? We had a deal. I gave you $80,000. I put another $40,000 into renovations. You can't sell it." My mother set her teacup down, her face a mask of tragic martyrdom. "Chloe, please try to understand. Your brother is in terrible trouble. Terrible. He could go to jail, Chloe. He could lose Jessica and the kids." "And what does that have to do with my house?" I demanded, though the sickening realization was already washing over me. "We need the equity," my father said, his voice flat, completely devoid of apology. "The market has skyrocketed, especially with the renovations you did. We can sell the house, pull out the cash, pay off Declan's debts, and clear this whole mess up." I stared at them, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of what they were saying. "You're stealing from me," I whispered. "You are stealing my down payment, my renovation money, and my home to pay for Declan's gambling and stupidity." "We are not stealing," my father snapped, stepping forward. "Legally, it is our house. We took the risk buying it. And frankly, you and Sam are young. You have good jobs. You're smart, Chloe. You always land on your feet. You can rent for a while and buy something else later. Declan needs this. He won't survive this if we don't help him." "And what about my $80,000? I choked out, the betrayal feeling like a physical knife twisting in my ribs. "We will pay you back your $80,000, my mother interjected quickly. "Eventually. Once Declan gets back on his feet and repays us, we will give you your money back. I promise, sweetheart." "You have to be kidding me," I laughed, a bitter, hysterical sound. "Declan has never repaid a dime in his life. You are throwing my life's work into a black hole." "It's done, Chloe," my father said coldly. "The house hits the MLS tomorrow. Mitchell says we'll have a cash buyer in a week. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." 30 days. I left their house in a daze. When I got home, Sam was waiting on the porch. He had seen the sign. When I told him the reality, that my parents were legally evicting us to bail out my deadbeat brother, I saw something break in Sam's eyes. But he didn't yell. He didn't blame me for trusting to them. He just pulled me into his arms as I collapsed onto our custom-stained oak floor and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. We tried to fight it. We hired a lawyer, but the reality of real estate law is brutal. Without a written contract stipulating our rent-to-own or trust agreement, I was legally nothing more than a month-to-month tenant. The $80,000 I gave them? My parents claimed to the lawyers it was a gift. The renovation money? Voluntary improvements made by a tenant. Pursuing a civil fraud case would take years and tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, money we no longer had. They sold our home to a wealthy couple relocating from California for $200,000 more than my parents paid for it. Not only did my parents recoup their initial money to pay off Declan's debts, but they pocketed all the equity Sam and I had built with our bare hands. The day we moved out was the darkest day of my life. I walked through the empty rooms, touching the kitchen counters Sam had installed, looking at the vintage sconces I had hunted down at flea markets. My parents didn't show up. Declan certainly didn't show up. We loaded our lives into a U-Haul and moved into a cramped, two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The grief was suffocating. For the first 2 weeks, I barely slept. I drafted 100 text messages to my mother, calling her every name in the book, only to delete them. But then, the sadness burned away, leaving behind something far more potent. Cold, hard, unbreakable anger. They thought I would just take it. They thought because I was the strong one, I would quietly rebuild my life while Declan continued to coast on the destruction of mine. They assumed I would eventually forgive them, because family is family. They were wrong. I wasn't just going to rebuild. I was going to construct an empire right in front of them, and I was going to make sure they never set foot in it. The era of Chloe, the dependable, understanding daughter, was dead. And my revenge was going to be spectacular. The first 6 months in that cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in the industrial district of Southside were a blur of grief and exhaust fumes. The walls were paper thin, the radiators clanked like a dying engine, and every time I looked at our mismatched thrift store furniture, a fresh wave of nausea washed over me. I had lost my $80,000 savings, my sanctuary, and my entire family in one brutal sweep. For the first time in my life, I blocked my parents' phone numbers. I blocked Declan. I blocked my mother's sister, Aunt Diane, who tried to play peacemaker by telling me I should be the bigger person. I severed the infected limbs of my family tree with surgical precision. Sam and I made a vow in that tiny, depressing kitchen. We weren't just going to recover, we were going to ascend. The betrayal became our high-octane fuel. We went into a period of extreme, almost monastic financial discipline. We didn't go out to eat for 2 years. We sold Sam's car and shared my old Honda Civic. Every single dollar was accounted for, categorized, and weaponized toward our future. Simultaneously, we threw ourselves into our careers with a terrifying intensity. I used the raw anger burning in my chest to negotiate a massive leap in my career. I bypassed the standard promotion track at my software firm and leveraged a competing offer to secure a vice president of operations role at a rival tech giant, Vanguard Logistics. The jump doubled my salary overnight and came with a lucrative stock options package. But the real explosion happened with Sam's architecture firm. Without the distraction of renovating a fixer-upper every weekend, Sam poured 80-hour weeks into his business. His turning point came 14 months after our eviction. A prominent commercial real estate developer named Bradley Hughes was taking bids for a massive, eco-luxury boutique hotel in the city center. The big, established firms submitted safe, boring designs. Sam submitted a brilliant, sweeping blueprint that integrated living green walls, solar glass atriums, and reclaimed industrial steel. Bradley Hughes loved it. Sam won the contract, and overnight, his boutique firm, Crescent Design, went from struggling startup to the most sought-after architectural studio in the state. By the end of year 3, our financial landscape had utterly transformed. The stock market had been incredibly kind to my Vanguard shares, and Sam's firm was pulling in 7-figure revenues. We had rebuilt our $80,000 loss and multiplied it tenfold. While we were quietly building our empire, the universe was busy delivering a spectacular dose of karma to my parents and Declan. I didn't seek out the information, but family gossip has a way of finding you. I ran into my cousin, Fiona, at a coffee shop downtown, and the tea she spilled was scorching. It turned out the $200,000 in equity my parents stole from me to bail Declan out was just a band-aid on a bullet wound. Declan's luxury auto-detailing franchise was a complete fraud. He hadn't just owed high-interest private lenders. He had secretly taken out a second mortgage on my parents' home, having fraudulently forged my father's signature on the loan documents. When the bank discovered the forgery, the fallout was catastrophic. To keep Declan out of federal prison, my father, Eric, the proud, uncompromising patriarch, had to liquidate his entire retirement portfolio to pay off the bank. The stress shattered my parents' marriage. Worse, after they saved him from prison, Declan's wife, Jessica, filed for divorce, taking their 2 children and moving out of state. Declan, broke and unemployable due to his new criminal record, had moved back into my parents' basement. They were currently drowning in debt, facing foreclosure on their own home, and living in a hell of their own making. I felt no pity. I felt absolutely nothing. A month after I ran into Fiona, Sam called me in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. His voice was vibrating with a quiet, intense excitement. "Chloe," he said, "clear your schedule for the afternoon." I found it. "Found what?" I asked, staring at a quarterly earnings report on my monitor. "The one," he replied. "The house." He texted me an address in Sterling Heights, the most exclusive gated old money zip code in the region. It was an area where CEOs, professional athletes, and tech billionaires lived. It was miles out of the league of the little craftsman we had lost. When I drove up the winding, private oak-lined driveway, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a fixer-upper. It was a masterpiece. It was a sprawling, 6,000-square-foot mid-century modern estate made of raw stone, floor-to-ceiling glass, and rich mahogany. It sat on 4 acres of pristine, landscaped grounds backing up to a private lake. It had an infinity pool, a detached guest house, a 6-car garage, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a Michelin-starred restaurant. It was listed for $3.2 million. "Sam," I whispered, as we stood in the grand foyer, looking out the massive glass walls at the glittering water of the lake. It's a fortress." Sam wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. I ran the numbers. With your Vanguard stock vestment and my corporate draw from the hotel project, we can put down 40% in cash. The mortgage is easily covered by our current income. We don't need any help, Chloe. We don't need investors. We don't need parents. He turned me around, holding a pristine, leather-bound folder. Inside was the pre-approval letter from our bank, entirely in our names. "Let's buy it," I said, a fierce smile spreading across my face. The closing took exactly 21 days. There were no handshake deals. There were no verbal agreements. When the heavy, gold-embossed deed was handed to us, the only names on it were Chloe Harding and Samuel Sterling. We didn't just move in. We claimed the space like conquering royalty. We spent the next 2 months furnishing the estate. I hired a private landscaping crew to turn the backyard into a private oasis. Sam converted one wing of the house into a stunning, sun-drenched home office. We were finally living the life we had bled for, and the ghost of Willow Creek was permanently exorcised. To celebrate, we decided to host a massive housewarming party. It was the social event of our circle. Sam invited his high-profile clients, including Bradley Hughes. I invited my executive team from Vanguard. We hired a private chef, valet parkers, and a string quartet to play on the terrace. I knew, inevitably, that the photos would end up on social media. I knew Fiona would see them. I knew the gossip would trickle down to my parents. I didn't invite them, of course. I hadn't spoken to them in over 3 years, but I secretly hoped they would see exactly what they had missed out on. I didn't expect them to actually show up. It was around 9 p.m. The party was in full swing, bathed in the warm, ambient glow of the estate's exterior lighting. I was standing near the infinity pool, laughing with my CEO and sipping a glass of vintage champagne, when one of the private security guards we hired for the gate approached me. "Ms. Harding," the guard said, leaning in discreetly. "I apologize for the interruption, but there are 3 individuals at the front gate demanding entry. They aren't on the guest list, but they claim to be your parents and brother." My grip tightened on the stem of my champagne flute. The air seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Did you let them in?" "No, ma'am. I kept them outside the main perimeter. I told them I needed your direct authorization." "I'll handle it," I said, my voice eerily calm. I caught Sam's eye across the patio. He instantly knew something was wrong. He excused himself from his conversation and walked over. I quickly explained the situation. His jaw set into a hard line, and together we walked down the long, sweeping driveway toward the heavy iron security gates. As we approached, the figures came into focus under the street lamps. It was Eric, Barbara, and Declan. The sight of them was almost jarring. They looked completely diminished. Eric, who used to carry himself like the CEO of the world, looked stooped and frail, his suit hanging off his frame. Barbara looked exhausted, her hair unkempt, the arrogant sparkle completely gone from her eyes. And Declan, the golden boy, looked like a complete wreck, wearing a rumpled jacket, staring at the ground, unable to even meet my gaze. They were staring up at the house, their mouths literally parted in shock. From the gate, the estate looked like a glowing glass jewel, massive and imposing. "Chloe," my mother gasped, gripping the iron bars of the gate as I approached. "My God. Chloe, this is your house?" "It is," I said, stopping a good 10 feet away from the gate. Sam stood right beside me, a silent, immovable wall of support. "What are you doing here?" "We saw Fiona's posts online," my father said, trying to summon a shred of his old authority, but his voice cracked. We needed to see you. We needed to talk." "There is nothing to talk about," I replied, my tone perfectly flat. "You are trespassing on private property." "Chloe, please." My mother started crying, actual, desperate tears streaking her face. "Things have been so terrible. We lost the house. The bank foreclosed last week. We're living in a weekly motel. Declan is trying to find work, but it's so hard with his record. We have nothing left. Please, sweetheart, we're family." "We saw the guest house," Declan chimed in, pointing a shaky finger toward the detached ADU near the garage. "Just for a few months, Chloe. Just until we get back on our feet. We can help around the property. Dad can do maintenance. Mum can cook. We just need a place to stay." I stared at them. I looked at the man who had stolen my life savings. I looked at the parents who had happily facilitated that theft, legally evicted me from my home, and told me I was smart enough to land on my feet. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the most liberating moment of my entire existence. "Dad," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the cool night air, "do you remember what you told me the day you sold my house from under me?" Eric swallowed hard, looking away. He didn't answer. "You said it was your house, legally, and you took the risk," I reminded him, enunciating every single word. "You told me that I was young, and I would just have to rent for a while. You told me it was just business." "We were wrong, Chloe," my mother sobbed. "We were so wrong. Please." "You were wrong," I agreed, taking a step closer to the gate, looking my father dead in the eye. "But you were right about one thing. I am smart, and I did land on my feet. But you see, when I gave you that $80,000, you told your lawyers it was a gift. Remember, you claimed it was a voluntary contribution to your property." Eric closed his eyes. "Well," I continued, gesturing to the sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate behind me, "consider that 80 grand a parting gift. Because this property, every brick, every pane of glass, every blade of grass, it is legally mine. I took the risk. And frankly, Eric, you're adults. You're smart. You'll figure it out. You can just rent for a while." "Chloe, you can't do this," Declan yelled, his face flushing red with a sudden, impotent rage. "You have all this space. We are your blood. You can't just leave us on the street." "Watch me," I said softly. I turned to the security guard, who was standing quietly to the side. "If they do not vacate the perimeter in exactly 60 seconds, call the police and press charges for trespassing." "Yes, Miss Harding." The guard nodded. I didn't wait for their response. I didn't stay to listen to my mother's wailing or my father's desperate apologies. I turned my back on them, linked my arm through Sam's, and walked back up the long, illuminated driveway toward the life we had built from the ashes of their greed. We rejoined the party, the sound of the string quartet completely drowning out the noise from the street, and we didn't look back once. Blood doesn't make a family. Respect, loyalty, and shared sacrifices do. My parents chose to save their golden child, and in doing so, they permanently lost the only daughter who would have actually cared for them. Sam and I didn't just build a home, we constructed an impenetrable fortress of our own making. And the absolute best part? The deed is exclusively in our names, and the locks are changed forever.